I've got Paul Murray in the other chair, who is now Creative Director New Markets for Matchlight.
Yep.
Is that right?
Okay.
Paul and I have worked together in the past. This is slightly more my area. I've haven't done much work in development myself, but have worked on factual programs and on a couple of programs that Paul has overseen. I once pitched perhaps the scariest idea and most ill-considered idea to Paul. It turned out. We can talk about that at some point if you want to. But I'm going to start with the question that I asked Michael first off, which, by the way, if any of you are at college now and perhaps thinking of coming to the University of West of Scotland to complete a degree, might not be any of you, this is the question I ask to everybody who wants to come and take the broadcast production course there, which is, what's your favourite television programme?
Of all time.
Absolutely.
God, I should have thought of this one. I suppose this does sound incredibly pretentious, but it probably is The Wire. I thought The Wire was just amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I remember Homicide: Life in the Streets, which was his first series, watching. I was living in London at the time, and it was on at like 11 o'clock on Channel 4, something really obscure. And I thought it was totally brilliant, and I never really knew it. I was in telly, but I wasn't in drama. Oh, I'm still not in drama. And I thought that was just brilliant. And then when The Wire came out, I thought it was just unbelievable. Like, just not like anything else on telly. And then subsequently finding out that all the things that are interesting about it were totally deliberate. So the fact that it's hard to understand is deliberate. The fact that well, it's actually what Michael was just saying, that the language is not modified at all is deliberate. The fact that there's no happy endings is it's like anti-drama, and I thought it was amazing. I thought it was really good.
What's interesting about The Wire, it's the writer, it's David Simons, isn't it?
It is David Simon, yep.
And he did a thing at the Edinburgh Television Festival talking about The Wire, which I think was actually right. And it was called Fuck the Casual Viewer.
Fuck the Casual Viewer. That's what it was called.
Which is quite interesting because it sort of goes against everything that
you're told
you're told about television,
yeah.
Which is that you have to keep on reminding them what they're watching and tell them what they're watching and lay it out, which we can go on to talk about.
Yeah. But also that never really rated anywhere.
That's true.
That is a bit of a myth, you know, and it didn't really win any awards either. But it's cited as this influential thing that you probably can't work in contemporary drama now without having seen it, because it's so influential. And I think that it goes against it does go against the rules of popular television, and I think that's where probably television is different in different genres. I mean, it is supposed to be an accessible mass media.
Yeah.
But sometimes it has to be something more than that, otherwise people just get incredibly bored with it. You know, if it's too easy, it's tedious and it's dull, and switch over and move on and go somewhere else.
We're going to start with your story about how you got into television. How did it happen? Was it always the plan?
Nope, never. I studied sculpture at Glasgow School of Art and always had this ambition to be a famous artist, and graduated, and there was a tremendous recession and there was no work in that. I then got into the music industry, and I did about 3 years doing that, touring around the world, and then the guy that I was with died pretty inconveniently. And so I had to find something else to do. I came back to Britain and was kind of sketching about, really thinking of what to do, and a friend of mine knew Muriel Gray, who was looking for a PA, and I started making her tea and toast in her production company. That's how it started. So it was completely random, and unfortunately it was one of those things that I knew somebody. But beyond that, it was not probably a conventional way in, I don't think.
And when you got that first job, can you remember being excited? Had you thought television? Yeah, I think that's the thing for me. Or
not really. I think I'd watched a lot of television, but I didn't know how to get into television. There was no. Well, there might have been university degrees to be had then, but I didn't know about them. And I came from Glasgow, and how would you ever know? I didn't know anybody in telly. My parents didn't know anybody in telly. it's just like, I don't know, I just didn't think about it actually. I didn't even think that it was a possible career to have. I just assumed people made telly. I didn't know who made telly. It just happened. They just switched on the telly and there it was. So I didn't really feel anything about it when I got it, other than that's good that I've got a job. And then gradually found it more and more interesting.
Can you remember what your first credit was, or your first program that you said, I did the...
I think I was the PA on. I think I was credited as Muriel's PA on a thing called Carnography, which was a 3-part series about car culture for Channel 4. Probably nobody watched that either, but yeah, it was sort of pretty random, really.
And pretty much since I think sort of almost since I've known you, you've worked in either producing programs or execing programs or in development.
Yeah.
How did you move into that? And I suppose we should start with saying, what is development?
Yeah. Well, I think it's different if you work for a big broadcaster. I think if you worked for the BBC or any of the ITV franchises, there was no such thing as development, really. You were a producer or a director or a researcher or a somethinger, and I don't really know how ideas would appear. I suppose there'd be conversations with people, I don't know. But then Channel 4 comes along, and Channel 4 is entirely, the programmes are made entirely by the independent sector, and at that time the independent sector was largely comedians, and so Talkback, Hat Trick, all those kind of companies were all comedians that started their own company to control their output and get more money, essentially. So I think that was the beginning of people coming up with ideas. So even with Muriel, a long time ago, everyone would sit around in an office and go, for a specific program, you'd turn up on Monday and go, right, what's your ideas for little 4-minute items for the next show? And you'd have to come up and pitch an idea. And then I suppose a TV show was a slight extension of that, but because they were an indie and I was always working for indies, if you didn't come up with ideas, there's no work. It's not like the BBC or the big ITV franchises where they had endlessly repeatable business, and at that time they would just go, well, we want to make a programme about whatever, gardens, let's just make a programme about gardens. It didn't work that way. None of the indies were ever going to get work that way. So that was the beginning of that culture of people coming up with ideas. And then I think, but it was probably, it was the move into what would be factual entertainment ideas that I think sort of changed everything. So Planet 24 and The Big Breakfast probably, certainly in my experience, that was the one that changed everything, because you created a house and it's filled with people and you can see the cameramen and there's different items and it's on every day, and that's a lot of ideas to come up with. Unlike a documentary where you go, well, we're setting it in an ambulance, or we're setting it at a police station, because things happen in police stations and you just wait until something's really good and then you follow it. To create a format was, I thought, really, really, really interesting. It's closer to drama in that sense that it doesn't exist. That house doesn't exist. Those people don't turn up every day and you happen to be filming it. You're going to make everything happen. And that appealed to me, that bit of television. I thought, oh, I really like that. I wasn't really interested in documentaries, to be honest. It never really floated my boat because I thought they were slow and they were kind of a bit boring. And do you know what? I think it's like, it was a hangover from when I went to art school. You had to manipulate things. Like, you couldn't just get a bit of wood and then take the bit of wood from there and go, there you go, that's a sculpture now. You had to do something to it to make it a sculpture. And so I quite liked that. And that bit of television, I thought, I get that. You gotta make stuff. So I suppose development is that. It's the world of, this doesn't exist, so you need to make it happen. But at the same time, you've got to know, or try and know, what the audience want, and what are their fears, what are their ambitions, what are their anxieties, what are they watching, what are they not watching, what's fashionable, what's not fashionable. You know, it's a kind of weird world that exists. You're sort of trying to predict people's behaviour. It's kind of weird. And because TV's a tricky thing to get people to watch, you know, they don't have to watch it anymore. And they've got choice like never before. So to get them to, and you don't really have you don't have the structure of, say, the movie industry, or where you just got to fuck it, put Will Smith in it and it'll be all right. We don't have that option because there's no stars like that really. There's a couple in entertainment, but even, you know, you can count on one hand in Britain who's a name that people will switch on just because it's them. Graham Norton, maybe, but you know, Jonathan Ross, maybe a while ago. I can't think of who else you would. You know, are you watching Strictly because it's Bruce? I don't think so, and I don't think you're watching it because of Tess Daly either. Actually, weirdly, the judges are maybe the stars of that show, but that's a weird.
It's a weird thing. I watch Strictly, and I don't like Bruce Forsyth, and I don't like Tess Daly, and I think it's the bright colours.
Yeah.
That's what I've come down to.
Yeah.
I had a student once say to me, doing a module about development, and she said, "What do you do if you've got no ideas?" And as it turned out, she did then eventually. She had quite a good idea for her program idea. But is there a way you can get better at ideas? Is there a way that you can get better at development? Are people born ideas people?
That's a good question.
What do you do? What do you do to come up with the ideas?
Well, the thing that I learnt the most, or the time that I learnt the most about development, was at Endemol, because Endemol are the company that come up with Big Brother and pretty much every other big format that you can think of in the last 10 years. And they had a creative unit in their, it was called the Creative Intern Unit. And it was like industrial in its scale. It was just incredible. I've never seen anything like that before, because I think before that people thought of ideas as precious things. Like, I've got one and I like it, therefore I'll pitch that, and then it doesn't get made and you get really offended and you take about 6 months to go over it. But Endemol were like, this is a machine, you know, you need 10 a day, because 9 of them won't work and 9 of them will be rubbish, and then you need to come up tomorrow and have another 10, another 10 and another 10. And I was like, oh my God, how'd you do that? But actually it was about, you need to watch a lot of telly. You need to be, I think, insatiably curious about the world. You know, how does things work? How does that work? How do they build a ship? I don't know. You know, how do you learn how to dance? What does it look like if celebrities dance? What does a celebrity football match look like? It's just like you just got to churn out stuff about, I wonder what would happen, or I wonder how that works, or I've never seen that before, or you just have to, I think, be endlessly curious about everything around you, because it's all sort of interesting. Like, it'd be possible to, like, I bet you that rubber, where that's manufactured, is probably quite interesting. You know, it's not a feature film, but it would probably last 5 minutes in a multi-item about how things are made. And so I think you kind of, I think if you think of ideas as like you've got a reservoir of ideas, I think probably development's not for you, because you'll run out of them quicker than the market needs them. Whereas I think if you've got a way of looking at the world, or then you could probably endlessly tap into that. And I think some people are better at it than others.
Do they ever come perfectly formed, or does it? How much of the work is done once you've got an idea? And
I don't think they ever really come perfectly formed. I think there's almost a little thing that never really goes away. Like the details of it change usually quite dramatically, and it's usually to do with where you film and how you can film and the cost of it, but the little nugget of it usually stays, and because it has to be arresting enough that you need a commissioning editor to go, yeah, I get that straight away. Because otherwise, I was talking to someone about it recently, most ideas you're just like, yeah, it's alright, kind of could see that work, and you know what I mean? You sort of spend endless amounts of hours in your own office, somebody comes up to you or you come up to them, and everyone's sitting about for an hour going, yeah, I suppose if you did it like that, it might work, and then you realise, oh, do you know what, can it, sack that, it's not going to work. It's not interesting, it's not instantly interesting enough, and I think it feels like for shows to be successful and to get commissioned, you need to instantly get them. And I sort of worked out quite a long time ago that you might as well instantly get it, and people can either like it or dislike it, than get into this grey world of you're going to pitch an idea to someone who's been pitched a lot of other ideas from a lot of other people who now all get it, and you're going to give them an idea, and then they have to think about it. So you're asking them to contribute to it in a way that it's just too much headspace for people. You might as well go in and go, right, this is it, and they go, I hate it, I know it, I get exactly what you want to do, but it's not for me and I don't like it, fine, move on, rather than get something that's sort of all right, but this is going to take 6 months to get right, and can anyone be bothered? And not really.
So when you're pitching it to a commissioner, it needs to spring perfectly formed into their head, pretty much.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think like it's the title and the top line, and I always thought there's two things, that if you read listings, and that's true everywhere now, that you get listing, the EPG on Sky or on your mobile, wherever it gets sent to, is, I think the title is, what is the title? Is it 20
so that's
characters?
the electronic program guide, which is a thing that comes up on your TV screen when you're flicking through the...
So even if you've got, it doesn't matter where it's getting sent and what device, there's a limit to the number of words that is on that, and that is it. Now, obviously you can have then a brief description, but the description on the EPG is exactly the same as the Radio Times. It is the title and maybe, if you're lucky, 25 words to describe this series. And it's like almost like a... Do you ever read the Racing Post? I don't know, I might not read the Racing Post, but not that I'm a big Racing Post guy, but it's like a code in the race. It tells you what the horses have done and how many things they've run before, and it's quite interesting. Those are like that now. It'll give you the producer, the title, whether it's a repeat or not, whether it's a series of 6 or a one-off. So that's your little code, you know what that is, and then it'll give you a little description of it. And so that's the only information you get as a viewer. You might be lucky and you've seen a billboard poster, maybe, if it's a huge show. You might be lucky and you've seen a trailer, but they only trail, I mean, the BBC will probably only trail, it's like 15 shows a year. And they're not going to trail, they're going to trail big Saturday night shows, they're going to trail dramas, and they might trail sporting events and things like that. You don't get a trailer for anything, there's no way to find out about anything. And when you come up with an idea for the BBC, and it's true of Channel 4 as well, they're called e-commissioning forms. So you have to fill out a form in order to get it registered with the channel, and then they'll track it and all this crap. Sorry if anyone's for the BBC here, it's not crap, it's a great idea. And you're only allowed 30 words. So like the whole system, everything, how you interact with telly, that's new telly, as opposed to that Coronation Street's on, and if you're a fan you're going to come back to it, and new television shows, a new series, that is all you've got to go on. So it makes sense that you should probably get quite good at that, because that's how you're going to pitch to somebody. Now you then need to unpack it and make it more complicated for commissioning editors, because they always want to think it's cleverer than it is. But you don't get a lot of chances to articulate that. And I think if you don't articulate it quickly, then it sounds like you haven't really thought about it and sounds a bit lazy, and then it doesn't. I think you might as well tell people what it is you're selling. They can choose to like it or dislike it, but the sort of beating around the bush stuff where, oh, I was thinking about this, and you think, oh.
So you think the title is very important?
Title's really important.
Yeah. I remember I was at Ideal World and a thing came around from the development team saying, anybody got any good titles for TV programmes? And it's the first time I'd come across that. It's quite a few years ago now. I'm thinking, that's a bit odd.
Yeah.
Just the title, but kind of makes sense now, doesn't it? That
yeah. I had a title one called Beat Yourself Unconscious. And I had it for ages, and it was a good idea as well. It was, actually, it was one of these things. It was a great idea. You just couldn't put it at telly. It was to take a quiz, conscious, and then take a quiz, hypnotised yourself to see if your unconscious mind could beat your conscious mind and untap. Anyway, I thought it was quite funny. So does everyone else that pitched it to. It turns out you can't actually hypnotise anyone. It doesn't actually exist. So it was undoable because it was unverifiable, and you didn't know whether if you were conscious you were lying, and it just was impossible to do. But the title was good. It was funny. It made people laugh. They got it straight away, and 2 channels went quite a long way to trying to get it done, but it just couldn't be done. And then I've prepared badly for pitches and gone in with some guff idea, and we just move on straight away because nobody's convinced. Everyone knows. You know yourself when an idea is not good enough, and they know, and it's just all a bit tedious.
I'll talk about some specific programmes that you've worked on. Paul's CV is Location, which has been made in Glasgow for years and still doesn't show any signs of never ever stopping, does it really? What was your involvement in it?
I was a producer for them. I think I was a series producer, and I was making a car show called Deals on Wheels with a guy called Mike Brewer and Richard Sutton. Mike Brewer still makes shows, Richard doesn't, and the idea was, it was at the beginning of those little Sony cameras that you could self-shoot. There was a big fad about that, and it was about real people doing their own things, and it was basically people buying and selling cars. More cars get sold second-hand than they do new, and it was the deal. They would go and do the deal, and he had a contract with Channel 4 for a number of series a year. Channel 4 came to us and said, can you do Deals on Wheels for cars?
You mean for
houses, sorry. So can you film people buying and selling houses? And we were like, okay, we'll go and have a look. And then weirdly, I was moving house in London, and there was it's about that way when things happen to you, sort of things are, there's a psychological thing that is to do with noticing things. You basically notice hardly anything around you until it has an impact on you. So if you buy a red car, all of a sudden you see lots of red cars around. Before that, you don't care because it's not interesting. So I was interested in houses at the time. I saw an article in the Evening Standard with Kirsty Allsop and her then real partner in a business, and she was a house hunter, and she would go, and if you had limited time and wanted someone to come and find your house, she would do it. I spoke to her, I thought, oh, that's quite interesting. And the other thing at the same time was I was trying to buy a house, and I thought, well, that's a bit weird. Estate agents act on behalf of the person selling the house to get the highest price, and then they tell you as the buyer, same person, they're trying to get you the best price. And I was like, well, that doesn't work. And I thought, that's really weird. I never thought of that before. So I was thinking, well, that's not fair then. If you're a buyer, you need someone to work on your behalf to get you the best deal, because the estate agent is working on behalf of the seller because they got a cut of this price. So why are they ever going to give you anything less? They're just not. And I met Kirsty and her partner, I can't remember who it was, I can't remember her name, and said, were they interested in it? They said they would think about it. Kirsty said she was interested in it. The other woman at the time said she wasn't, and that company parted ways quite quickly. I went back to Channel 4 and said, we had this idea. So we took all these things together. We said, right, the idea is you can't do Mike Brewer. Mike Brewer doesn't know anything about houses. I found someone that does, and it was called The Great House Hunt at the time. That was its first title. And we pitched it, they liked it, they said they would do a pilot, and then we had to find a partner, an on-screen partner for Kirsty, and we went round all the estate agents in London and the South East doing endless screen tests of really not very pleasant, as you might imagine, London estate agents. And we're nearly, this is not an apocryphal story, or we were like, we can't find anyone, this is like going nowhere. And we'd paired people up with Kirsty, like we had her, we knew she was good, and we kept on doing little tiny tasters with all these people, and they were just shocking. And then this guy, in fact, Ben Bowie, do you know Ben Bowie? Ben Bowie is a guy, a director who now runs Starlo Smithson, who made the rock climbing film, what's it called? The one that he nearly dies, has to cut the rope. Anybody?
Line.
Perfect, well done. All right, so that's who did it. So he and I, he was the director, I was the producer, and we had to find them. And then he said, we were sitting in an edit suite in London going, this is rubbish. And he said, oh, there's this guy, I don't know, he's bald, he's got a speech impediment, you know, but I quite like him. Do you want to have a look at it? And we sat and looked at it, and you instantly, within about 2 seconds, you're like, yep, wow, he's the one. Wow. And put them together, and they got on together, and it's about that thing. I always think it's about TV. Finding people on TV is about who you want to hang out with, who do you want to spend some time with. If they're interesting and nice, and you want, or who do you need? I would like Kirsty and Phil to be my pal if I was buying a flat. Therefore, that's why I'm going to watch that telly programme. And then we did a pilot, and it went well, and they commissioned a series. So
it's weird, isn't it? So, and that's been for Glasgow and for 2 companies now, millions and millions of pounds worth of business, isn't it?
And it'll have made Phil and Kirsty millionaires, and from one really dodgy idea.
If you don't know, Phil and Kirsty, so that location is made for Ideal World, which is now IWC Media. Yep. Phil and Kirsty have left and set up Raise the Roof, which is over there or wherever. Yep. And they make Phil Spencer's Secret Agent and all kinds of programs.
Kirsty's Homemade Homes.
And that's employing
hundreds.
Home crafts, Christmas with Kirsty, all that kind of stuff came from that. And what's interesting about that, so in development, you have to, I'm going to use a word I hate, but I can never think of another one. You have to be aware of the zeitgeist, don't you, of what's happening a bit in society. And what's interesting about property is that it looked in 2007, 2008 that was it, didn't it? When no one was going to be buying. But actually what happened was they sort of became more interesting because it was more
But see, interesting it wasn't about property, because the only show at the time that was on was Changing Rooms, which wasn't about property, it was about design, really. And so that came about, and then Channel 4 leapt on that about buying and selling houses, and I mean it was at the peak of everything, madness, look where that lead to. But actually when I was at Endemol, Peter Bazalgette, the story that Peter Bazalgette says about how he came up with Ground Force, I think that's what you need to, if you had a motto about what development is, this would be it. And he was in a queue on a Sunday in I don't know, whatever, B&Q, I think it was B&Q, in the garden section, and he was queuing up, and he noticed that everyone else was in the queue paying for their stuff, and not a single person had any seeds. They all had like trolleys of plants, and he was like, oh, that's interesting. And he's like, people just want instant gardens. Nobody is going to spend 20 years, cultivating a garden, because no one's got any time, no one's got any patience, no one's got the skills, and they just want instant gardens. And he went back to the team at Endemol and said, right, we need to think of a show that means you can get a garden overnight, because that's what people are interested in. And Ground Force, again, it sounds weird, but and not to be entirely fixated on money, but if you're in the development bit of it, you're in the industrial bit of television, you're not in the art bit of it. It's not like you do one series a year and you don't do another one for 2 years and that was your gift to the world, and you're in it to make money, because the companies need money because they've got overheads, they've got staff to pay, and ultimately if you can get a good format, it's properly life-changing for lots of different. I mean, hundreds of people will have been employed in Scotland in television because of that one show. That one show doesn't exist. You know, it was made up, you know, on a piece of paper in somebody's head, and then it's kind of weird. It's not like you say, oh, I don't know, what do you need in life? It's not like you've invented something like a kettle, and all of a sudden you go, well, yeah, everyone wants kettles. You know, it's a TV show. It's kind of weird. So I think that's sort of, I would say that's the way to look at it, is that you've got to look at what happens around you and what's the world about you, and what does your pals talk about, what does your mum talk about, what do your aunts talk about. You know, what I'm interested in is not necessarily what the rest of the country's interested in. That's just what I'm interested in. But if you're trying to make a popular television show that you're going to get the most amount of people to watch as possible, it needs to be in the, you know, it needs to be in the air. It's going to have popular appeal. Actually, you should look at, I don't know if anyone's watched Benefit Streets, but you should watch Benefit Street and compare it to, say, oh, I don't know, what was quite an old one? Something like, is it Hannah and Her Sisters, or Jackie and Her Sisters, an old ITV one? Anyway, the point is that Benefit Street has got nearly 6 million viewers in Channel 4 just now. That is unheard of just now. I mean, that's unprecedented. Nothing is getting that on Channel 4. So that means that they've taken viewers from ITV, probably, BBC One, probably, people that don't watch television. Now, the programme itself is pretty bland, to be honest. It's not amazing. It's not, you don't look at it and go, well, that's clever. You know, they've done something really clever, or they've manipulated it. It's just a street in Britain that's trying to get by. And it's pretty fair, you know, you can sort of, and what's quite interesting about it is that, you know, whatever side of the political spectrum you're on, you can claim it for yourself. If you're right wing, you can say, look at all the scroungers, and if you're left wing, you say it's a disgrace that people have to live like that. But that has caught the temperature of Britain for something. Now, whether they knew that when they commissioned it, I don't know. You know, it's possible that a show like that would just sort of sink without trace. But it's got a good title, Benefit Street. It's already provocative. You might watch it for 5 minutes to see what it's like. If you watch the first 5 minutes of it, it's full of, you know, 90% of the people on this street are on benefits. And then there's that clip of the girl called Black D going, they're on benefits, they're on benefits, they're on benefits. You would, if you'd switched on, you'd probably stick with it. And I think you sort of get a sense of that is not a new show at all, you know.
Yeah.
And neither was Pop Idol or X Factor or. Are you kidding? That's the oldest shtick in British entertainment, probably. I mean, it's not even any different from Opportunity Knocks in the 70s. It's the same. It's a panel of judges and one of them's grumpy. You're like, you didn't do anything. But its time had come, you know, nobody had done a, you know, talent contest on telly hadn't been on for 25 years. Nobody really knew what they were like again. Nobody knew who was in Britain. It caught a kind of mood and a sort of, yeah, let's do it, why not do it now?
And there's a show on, most of you are probably too young to remember Changing Rooms, which is one of the stable changing rooms in Ground Force. And there's a show on BBC Two at 7 o'clock now called, what is it called? Great British Interior Design Show or something.
Yeah, it's absolutely tanking.
Yeah, and it is Changing Rooms, kind of all the shots are the same. It's very, very familiar. So if you know your TV history, you just need to, and that's another thing, is to spot a show that's about 10 years old or something. How can we, let's redesign that.
But people do, I do development stuff with Simpsons titles, and I mean, you can't use anything to spark a thought, because it is industrial. It's not art. So you need to get into a way of thinking that's going to come up with something original. You know, it's like that book thing. Everyone's got one book. Well, then you'd be unemployed in 2 minutes if in television you had one idea. So I would just use it. And people, you can get genres, get people. You know, you take, I don't know, whoever. Bear Grylls, and then put a whole lot of cooking shows over, or a whole lot of genres. A cooking show. So what would a cooking show for Bear Grylls look like? Well, it might be that. All right. Well, what would a travel show with him look like? What would or get a title and a presenter and rummage them all up and get films. You just have to sort of keep going about how you need to look at the world in a slightly cockeyed way, but with one sort of eye on the fact that it's popular. You can, you know what I mean, you can look at the world in a really odd way and you think, Jesus, that's a bit weird, and no one will watch it. You know, so you always have to sort of surf that. It's original enough to be different, but it's not so original that people just don't get it and they just don't come to it.
Talent is the other big area we've not talked much about, and you're partly responsible for Piers Morgan being wherever he is now in America.
The President of America, probably.
Pretty much the President of America. I can't remember. Tabloid Tales was the first one, was
Tabloid
it?
Tales was the first one, yeah.
Yeah, Tabloid Tales, and then I think the next one was one that I was involved in a bit, which was You Can't Find Me, I'm Famous.
Yep.
Then after that it was
Dark Side,
and was that?
That was it.
That was it, and then he went to America. So what
well,
was
he went to ITV. Actually, the reason he didn't...
Of course he did, yeah, he went to ITV.
And the reason he did that, I mean, that's how fickle and weird this business is he went to ITV because he was pissed off that no one at the BBC had taken him out for a congratulatory lunch. That was it. I'm absolutely serious. He was like shouting and swearing and didn't even fucking take me out for lunch. I'm going to ITV. And you're like, what? How does that happen? But, you know, it's kind of, you know, I'm sure there's other things like, you know, there would be other incentives to do it and all that. But you know, talent needs to feel nurtured and that they are looking their best because, you know, it's them that's in front of the camera. I get that. They need to be nurtured, they need to be assisted in order to get the best out of them. So,
what was his thing? What was Piers Morgan's particular thing that made him watchable and popular?
I think he was controversial. I think people had an opinion about him. I think bland and vanilla is not good on telly. I think I mean, Jim Davidson winning Big Brother last night is quite interesting. You can't say you can't have an opinion about him. Well, you can, obviously, but it's unlikely. You'll either like him or dislike him. So TV, I think, is always looking for people that you can have an opinion about. I think he was clever. He was well connected. He did work hard, definitely. You know, he was a grafter. I mean, you must remember that as well.
Yeah,
you know, he was on his game. You know,
yeah.
he would never turn up not really knowing what to do, and he would never sort of bluff it. And so I think you're looking for people. I think you look for people that you want to go, wow. You know, they know stuff. I don't think it really matters whether they're historians or cooks or. You just look at them and you go, well, that looks effortless. Well, you know that it's taken them 20 years studying at college to know about the medieval era or whatever it is. But it looks kind of impressive. You think, that's somebody on the top of their game. I think that tends to be... I can't think of anyone that is a success on telly that you think, well, they don't know what they're talking about. They usually look like they've got credentials, they've got credibility. As I say, you like them or don't like them, but there's a compelling reason. And it'd be hard to say you liked Simon Cowell, but there's a reason to watch him. You know, you kind of don't really know what he's going to do, and I think that that's probably what you have to fight against all the time in telly. Is just, what's the point in watching this person? And Jeremy Clarkson's the same. You know, I don't really care whether people like him or don't like him, but you're going to watch him because he's got something to say. And I think that what happened in the last maybe 4, 5, 6 years is that because the death of multi-item shows, magazine shows, the kind of ubiquitous presenter has sort of disappeared off the face of the earth. You know, there was a lot of them around, young, attractive men and women, particularly in things like T4, and most multi-item shows, and you needed 3 or 4 faces and you needed people to be articulate, but they just had to do over the course of a series, they'd be doing 10 different items and 10 different things. Well, shows like that just don't exist anymore. It's experts, it's immersive people, it's people that have done it themselves. I think you need that. Seems to be the fashion, but then the fashion could change, and they might go back. Everyone might be bored with it. Everyone's got very bored with formats now. But everything was formats until Gypsy Weddings, probably, and then everyone's now like, no formats. It's got to be real. It's got to be real people. You can't see the hand of the producer anywhere, and so it's gone that way again. And then because I always thought that telly was like under 12 football. You'd kick the ball, and everyone would pile over the ball, and then the ball would go somewhere else, and everyone piles over there. Yeah. TV's like that. They go, hit, right, get in there as well. We'll make our own benefit street, and we'll call it something else. And then everyone will make too many of them. The audience will get bored. They'll start to fall off a cliff. They'll look for the next big thing really quickly, and they'll want formats all of a sudden.
And are you working on a Baking Meets Benefit Street show?
Baking, but actually, weirdly enough, did meet a presenter who was, cooking on a budget, let's just say.
So, just to move to, you're now creative director in new markets. So, are those new markets looking for the same kind of, I don't want to use the word formatted then, but repeatable, returnable programs, and can you understand those worlds in the same way that you understand the UK to sell into them?
Kind of. I think there's two different things in telly. I think there's British domestic television, which is super served by the programmes that are made here and bought for here, so imports can do well as well. And then there's formats and things that you can make for the rest of the world, and they have to be universal things, and not everything is universal. So, Antiques Road Trip, which is a big show that we both worked on, and the team that I was working with at the time came up with, that hasn't sold anywhere. And yet it's a massive hit in Britain, and it'll have made a lot of money for STV, but you just don't sell it because nobody's interested in antiques in the same way as they are in Britain, or not enough to commit to that level of spend. So, but some things are universal. I was in China last year twice trying to sell shows, and dating formats are big over there, as you might imagine. Talent contests are massive over there because they've got a big history of karaoke.
A big order for, was it the Gadget Show, did I hear?
A Gadget Show has gone to China as well because they're obsessed with phones, and because their economic development has gone like that. It's literally like the equivalent of the Industrial Revolution in Britain. It's just overnight, everyone's gone from being farmers to, although interestingly 75% of China is still peasant farmers. So you have to get to know. It's quite difficult to pitch there. I found it quite difficult, and the people that I was with, is to get your head round what it's like to live in China. What are you worried? What are they worried about? What do they want to watch? Do they own their own houses, or do they not own their own houses? There's no point in pitching a property ladder idea if nobody owns their own house. Well, they're like, well, I don't know. So things like that are quite. But parenting is universal. Dating is universal. Schools are universal. Hospitals are universal. So there's certain things that I think translate more easily than others. And the Gadget Show is actually quite a clever one, although it's not an amazingly clever show. It was clever to spot that China is very tech savvy, and that there's a massive emerging middle class with lots of disposable income that want to get as far away from agricultural Chinese history as possible, as quickly as possible. So that was clever. So I think the same rules apply. You've got to try and work out what different cultures are like, because it's not always obvious. And America's the other good one. America's the one that I can't remember who said it, but it was the what is it? 2 countries separated by
A common language.
yeah. Who was that?
I might have been Churchill. No.
No, I think
I don't
anyway.
know.
But you think America and Britain are like
Mm-hmm.
cultural TV bedfellows, and they're not at all. It's a really different system. It's a really different way of working. There's different interests. There's different worlds. I mean, they think we are ridiculously self-deprecating because we bumble in and pitch and go, oh well, hello, I don't know if you're gonna like this idea, and they're like, what? Because they really are like, okay, so you're gonna want this show because it's gonna be a great hit for you, and because their whole system's based on massive rewards. The American TV execs get paid millions if they get a hit, so they want to know it's going to be a hit. Well, the British system isn't in that same, even though it's relatively well remunerated, it's not mega rich. So that's already a different system. They have less stringent rules from Ofcom, and so there's a big summit in America called Real Screen Summit, which has just happened this week, and there was a big thing about everyone's bored with factual television in America. It's just hit a wall because of all these shows about guns, cars, choppers, gold diggers, and they're all bollocks and totally made up. So the storylines are literally written up by the producers. Say you lost all the gold, kick the can over, and then that's you down 10 grand a year. Well, you're paying them 50 grand a year to be on the show, so that's fine. And it's just falling apart in America. It's really quite interesting.
All this kind of porn wars, storage
Of course, you're
stuff.
talking about paid television, not like PBS, which
No.
PBS
It's like,
has quite a large market.
yeah,
as well.
it's like it'll be known as non-scripted in the States in both the main channels, the networks, and also the multiple satellite channels. And what they're saying is that drama was dead 10 years ago in the States because it was just endless procedurals set in a TV, set in a courtroom or a cop drama, be another cop drama, another partnership, it's totally gone the other way. Partly with The Wire, partly with things like Breaking Bad, partly with the comedies, and that's where all the creativity is now. And also TV there's a reason that TV became factual, non-scripted was the writers' strike. So that's why everyone in America piled into non-scripted, because they could make it and they had holes in their schedule, so there was a good reason for it. But they're bored with it now, and I think everyone's sort of slightly scratching their head going, well, what's next? So I think there are common themes to international telly, and there are weirdly, oddly, incredibly different bits about it, even in countries that you think you know about, and you don't really. So it's a bit of that, and Russia's become a big market, and Brazil's a big market for English-speaking programs as well. It's just kind of odd.
It's coming up to 5 to 6. We started a little bit late, but I suppose we should finish around about 6ish, just gone.
Yep.
Anybody got any questions for Paul, please? Robin?
Yeah. Sometimes we get sucked into areas because that's just the way the work flows.
Yeah.
But I was going to ask you, if you had your perfect job
Yeah.
on a perfect production
Yeah.
and a perfect genre,
Yeah.
what would that be?
Remaking The Wire.
Yeah. I'd like to be in The Wire. I want to be Omar Little. That's what I want to be.
Gotta think outside the box.
I like what I do. I like coming up with something from nothing. So it would be developing an idea from scratch that turns into format that would be a hit that you could sell around the world. That's what I would like. That's what I'm supposed to be doing, actually. That is actually my day job. But
genre or anything, like
No.
reality or documentary
No.
or.
Not really. I sort of think they're all. the area's not that I'm not that bothered about the area. I know some people are. Some people love cooking shows, and that's what they do, and they make a whole career out of it. And it's the exercise I find interesting. It doesn't exist. You're going to make it exist. You've got to phone everyone up. You've got to get talent attached. You've got to think the idea through. So it has to logically work. I used to like. Do you know what? I'd like an international hit game show. I love game shows. I think they're amazing, and I've done a few of them, and they've never been hits. But they're really, really hard to do.
Nice.
It'd be lovely. I'd be rich.
It'd be like Jeopardy in the US.
Yeah.
You spend like, what, 25, 30 years?
Well, I watched the guy who came up with the cube, and that was in development for 10 years before it got made. And there's all sorts of weird little worlds that don't work, and there's it's like an internal logic. It doesn't matter. The game is obviously nonsense because they're games and they don't exist, but they have an internal logic that you have to set up. So why does that happen? Where do they physically go? You got to. I love that. I absolutely.
The puzzle of it.
Yeah, the puzzle of it is just amazing to do, and if you get one commissioned and then it's amazing. I'm not that interested in making shows or being in location or sitting in edits. I find them a bit tedious. But that bit of working a world out, getting that commissioned, and then if it flies and it becomes a success is really amazing. But for any one quiz that gets made, I'd say 25 get binned, either within the first minute that you think, or the first hour that you think about it, or 6 months or a year later when you just can't get it to work. Even though you've got a great title, you've got a great host, you've done a pilot, it kind of makes sense. It's just one little thing just won't, you just watch it and go, it just doesn't work. It's not dramatic enough, it's not exciting enough, there's not enough at Jeopardy, it's interesting. That's the bit that I like about it.
Any other questions from the floor? I've got more, but
bored them to death.
Well, I would have.
You can have one more, Robin. Come on, of course.
You said you don't like working with editing, but I assume that you work with the production, the post-production crew. So how do you feel about, there's a new trend to tending to turn towards more Avid and Premiere Pro rather than Final Cut, because there's some disappointment with Final Cut in certain areas. And I was wondering whether you had any feelings on that at all.
Do you know, I have no opinion about things like that whatsoever. And it's the same with cameras and things. I don't know. Like, somebody else can work that one out. I think, you obviously, you want to make the best that you can with the money that you've got available. But there are people love that, post-production people love talking about stuff like that. Whatever. And it's not because I'm being rude about it, but I've got other things to think about.
It's quite an interesting point about how you could argue that the non-linear editing completely, Avid, Final Cut Pro, whatever it is, has made this kind of world possible because things are endlessly changeable. Yeah. It used to be 10, 12 years ago, you'd say, well, we could change it, but we'd have to go down a generation and we'll have to copy, But now
it's much more fluid.
And an exec or a commissioner or anybody can come in and go, put that there, put that there, put that there. Right, I'll see you tomorrow. Okay. And it's possible.
But I also think that it's smart to be across it, but not in I don't think you have to be across it in such minute detail. Because the reason that all those rig shows came about was essentially because somebody at some point sort of stumbled across the GoPro, and then it's a game changer because it's a tiny little camera. You can stick it anywhere. People don't behave in the same way that they do when there's big cameras around. So all those rig shows from 24 Hours in A&E, One Born Every Minute.
I love little cameras.
So they've created a whole genre of television based on a new bit of technology. So I think you have to be aware of it because it looks like it looks like it's another turn of the dial. That's such a cliche. Whoa, that's TV cliche bingo. But I do think everyone's looking for something new and something different. And if you can go, right, we're not gonna. And if you watch things like 24 Hours in A&E and One Born Every Minute, it's incredibly detached from everything. It has changed the editorial quite dramatically, because previously big documentaries, important documentaries at the BBC and ITV would have been voiced, in a big heavy, today we're in Leeds, the hospital, 5 million people die a day here, and you'd be like, wow, this is really important, isn't it? Yeah. Or it would be like a daytime thing where it would be a presenter would be in amongst the mums and dads and people going, how are you feeling? And putting them, you're just about to be operated on, how do you feel? To which the answer would probably be terrified. But as soon as you put those cameras in, nobody's about, none of the production people are anywhere. So people behave in a different way, and they're not talking to the camera, they're not talking to the cameraman, they're not talking to the presenter.
It's more natural.
It's much more natural, and what you get is you see people having real conversations. And then what's also interesting is they have technical conversations which you think are boring. And for quite a long time in television, when you made television, when people would talk about those things, you'd be told by commissioning editors, oh, you need to explain that, and then you'd have to look for some shots that were cutaways that you could put a voiceover in to explain what a blah 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 is. And they haven't done that, and it's quite a different watch. And because people go to it, you could then argue that you don't need voiceover anymore, and maybe that's a new way of doing things. And so I think technology evolves things, but unless you're really into it, I think you just need to keep on top of it rather than,
Anyone? Right, I've got 2 final questions then. Best or worst day in TV? I'll let you answer either of those.
Best day in TV.
Or worst?
Best, I suppose winning an award's quite good. Mm-hmm. And getting a commission. Getting any commission. There's a moment where you get a phone call from a commissioning editor saying we're going to do it, and there's a brief 20-second moment of pure elation. You think, oh my God, this is actually going to get on telly. And then the rest of it is like, oh, how'd I get this on telly? Probably too many worse moments to... It wasn't that you and I both know what show. I did a show called Help My Dog's As Fat As Me, which is a good title.
Good title. But again, it's kind of an old BBC Three title, isn't it? You probably wouldn't
get away with it. And it was overweight pet owners and their overweight dogs going to a country retreat to lose weight together. Brilliant. It's a really good idea. It was public service right at the heart of it. It was funny. It was a good title. It was a brilliant taster tape, and sold it to BBC. And it's the worst production I've ever been on in my life. It was traumatic, because you realise that people that have overweight dogs feed them badly, and they are overweight because they eat too much and don't move around very much. And so putting them through this process for a telly programme became really stressful, because people were collapsing and dogs were collapsing, and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to kill people and their pets making this. So then, because that was in the back, and then, so ambulances would be like sort of kind of walking around, making sure that nobody would fall. And then dogs, you'd be like, oh my God, why is that dog lying down? And it was just lying down asleep, and you'd get a vet over to check it, and it was so stressful. And then the result of it being so stressful meant that you had to reduce everything. So instead of going, which the idea was, we're going to make them run a marathon in their first week, and everyone's like, great, that's what we're going to do. And then you realise you can't do that. And so you're going, do you want to walk your dog up to the end of the room and back? And that won't kill the dog, and it won't kill the owner, but it's really boring television. And so it was just awful. That was about 4 months of awful. That wasn't a day of awful. So
I just want to add that I wasn't actually involved in it, but I can remember seeing Paul pacing the office. It was you could tell it was a bit stressful. So just to finish then, sort of tips about how would you go about getting into development, and is there a way in, or is there what do you need to show to someone when you're trying to impress someone to get a job in development?
It is ideas. I mean, it really is a beast. It takes so many to get something commissioned, and they have to. I like meeting people that come up with something quirky, even if you know it can't get made, because like you might as well come in and say, right, I've found a billionaire who's got an underwater balloon that's going to raise the Titanic. You'd be like, really? Well, it's probably not going to happen, but that's kind of quite interesting. I think it's got to be arresting, it's got to be interesting, it's got to be, because the other thing you've got to think about is pretty much everyone in television that's in the development side of it has had every idea under the sun.
So we should probably finish there, but could you join me in thanking Paul Murray very much?